Hi, my name is Yulin Zhang. I'm here to present our paper, Accelerating Combinatorial Filter Reduction Through Constraints. This paper is collaborated with Hazhar and Jason from University of South Carolina and my advisor Dylan Shell from Texas A&M. We focus on the resource minimization of a particular type of estimator, which is called a combinatorial filter. Filter minimization is to minimize the number of states used by a combinatorial filter. It can help us to understand the fundamental information structure of the tasks. To introduce combinatorial filters and motivate filter minimization, let's consider a safari park. This park has a rich mix of wild animals, and there's a ticket office at the bottom right. The ticket office has vehicles for rental, and each vehicle is equipped with a compass to measure the orientation of the vehicle before and after its movement. The vehicle has two gears. It can either drive at a low gear to move below 15 miles per hour, or at a high gear to move above 15 miles per hour. But there are three types of roads with different speed limits. Each vehicle has to choose appropriate gears to respect the speed limit. For convenience, we label each road with a number, and here is a filter that can automatically shift gears for each vehicle so as to satisfy the speed limit. It creates a state for every road and then uses sensor readings to locate the vehicle, and it chooses the appropriate speed according to the color of the state. Here in the filter, red represents high gear and cyan represents low gear. For example, starting at the bottom right initial state, road 1, it transitions to road 2 if it faces west before the movement and then faces north after the movement. This filter describes a function from sequences of sensor readings to sequences of colors. We call this input sequence a string. Notice that this filter is not state efficient because it creates a state for every possible location, which may not be necessary. We are interested in finding a filter with the fewest number of states, such that it has the same functionality. The functionality is defined as the following two properties. The first property is language inclusion. It requires that every input string that can be traced in the original filter should also be able to be traced in the minimizer. The second property is about the output of the string. It requires that the output of the strings in the minimizer should be the same as their original output. We say a filter output simulates the original filter if it satisfies these two properties. You may think that filter minimization is very similar to automata minimization, but they are different. Automata minimization preserves the accepting strings, while for filter minimization, the set of strings for each output can actually increase. This difference puts them in different complexity class. Automata minimization can be solved efficiently, while filter minimization is NP hard. There is a thread of work that minimizes filter via merging operations. Our prior work shows that both merging and splits are required. It uses a vertex cover, which is a collection of sets, to model merging and splits. Every set in the cover is merged into a single vertex, so the filter minimization problem is converted into a minimum vertex cover problem, where we want to find a vertex cover with the minimum number of sets. If one vertex is included in multiple sets, then we say that vertex is first split into multiple pieces, and each piece is merged into different sets. For example, here W6 is split into 2, and one is merged with W5, and the other one is merged with W7. The vertex cover should also satisfy some additional constraints. For example, all vertices in each set should be compatible with each other, such that you will not merge the vertex with different colors. They should also satisfy zebra constraints, such that after merging, a vertex will not non-deterministically transition to multiple vertices under the same label. So we have talked about how to minimize a filter where every state has exactly one color. What if there are some states with multiple colors? Here's a picture from the previous example. Let's say we find out that the speed limit of the gravel road is 30, not 15. Then we can drive in both high gear and low gear on the gravel roads. As a consequence, the safari park filter has states with two colors. We call this filter a cover filter. We are interested in minimizing the cover filters, where the language inclusion is the same as before, and the output of the string in the minimizer should be a subset of those in the original filter. Our prior work generalizes to minimize cover filters by extending the mutually compatibility relation to group compatibility relationship. But this size of the group compatibility relationship is exponential. As a consequence, thinking about those constraints via covers is not efficient. So instead of considering the constraints on the covers, we formalize them on the induced filter. As we mentioned earlier, each set in the cover is merged into a single vertex in the induced filter. So we introduce binary variables to encode the structures of the induced filter, and this leads us to an integer nonlinear program. Here, Qi represents the fact that the I set in the cover is not empty, so it corresponds to a valid state in the induced filter, and the objective is to minimize the total number of states used by the induced filter. The properties of the determinism and output simulating are written as nonlinear constraints. This formula only has a polynomial number of variables and constraints, which is a big improvement compared to the prior published complete algorithms. But it has nonlinear constraints, which are hard to solve. So we linearize those constraints and convert it into an integer linear program. The total number of constraints increases, but not significantly. Observe that the objective function is very simple. It counts the total number of states used by the induced filter. So we propose a third formula by treating the number of states as a budget and decrease the budget until we can find a solution with the minimum number of states. The solution with budget k must be deterministic and respect the output, and this is formalized as a Boolean satisfaction problem, where the determinism and the output simulating are written as constraints in conjunctive normal form. In this formula, we also observe that there is a set of constraints that may not always be active, so we treat them lazily, and we only add those constraints if they are validated by some solution. Now I have introduced 4 different formulas, and each of them has only a polynomial number of variables and constraints. We implement those algorithms with off-the-shelf solvers. For integer nonlinear program, it can only solve the problems with size less than 10, so we will not report its results. Here we collect the time used by those algorithms to find a minimizer, and we compare their performance with respect to different number of observations and colors. The observations are the labels on the edges. As we increase the number of observations, the time used by those algorithms tend to decrease. But as we increase the number of colors, the problem becomes harder and the time increases. As you can see, set-based approach outperforms linear integer programming, and lazy set is better than set. To understand the difference between set and lazy set, we profile the number of clauses and the size of the filters found along the way. In these pictures, green represents set and red represents lazy set. Lazy set uses fewer clauses than set, but it finds the solution much faster. Does lazy set always outperform set? The answer is no. Here's a Safari Park filter. It has a large number of states that can be merged, and most of the constraints are active. In this case, it takes longer for lazy set to incrementally add the constraints. As a summary, we have revisited the filter minimization problem, and we observed that the formalization of the constraints in our prior work is inefficient. We propose 3 new formulas, including integer nonlinear programming, integer linear programming, and set. All of them use only a polynomial number of variables and constraints. We further propose a lazy treatment of those constraints, which is the lazy set method, and we show that lazy set outperforms set when the constraints are not always active. That's the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.